The snow fell in relentless sheets, turning the world into a ghostly blur of white. At a deserted bus stop on the outskirts of Anchorage, 17-year-old Hailey Rivers clutched her 2-month-old daughter Grace tighter against her chest. Her thin jacket was no match for the merciless Alaskan winter. The last bus had come and gone, and now there was nowhere left to go. Tears froze on Hailey's cheeks as she whispered, "Stay with me, baby. Please stay with me." 3 hours earlier, she had stood on her parents' porch duffel bag at her feet as her father slammed the door in her face. "No daughter of mine will bring shame into this house," he had said. Her mother cried silently behind him, making no move to help. At 17, Hailey chose her daughter over her reputation. Now with the temperature dropping and Grace's cries growing weaker, that choice might cost them both their lives. Then headlights cut through the swirling snow. A battered blue pickup truck slowed to a stop. The window rolled down to reveal an elderly woman with wild silver hair and a voice sharp as the wind. "You look like you're in a real pickle, girl," she called out. Hailey hesitated. Trust a stranger or freeze to death. If it were you standing there, would you take the risk? Let me know in the comments below and stay with me because this story's just beginning. I used to think that family meant safety, that no matter what mistakes you made, the people who raised you would stand by your side. That belief shattered the night my father threw my duffel bag into the snow and slammed the door. Growing up, I was the perfect daughter, church on Sundays, top of my class, polite, modest, and visible when necessary. Everything my parents, especially my father, demanded. Until I made one mistake. One irreversible mistake. I got pregnant. The father, Daniel Mercer, was a college freshman. At first, he was sweet, promising to figure it out together. But the second I told him about the pregnancy, he blocked my number. Blocked me like I was some problem he could erase. I hid the pregnancy for as long as I could. Loose sweaters, excuses about not feeling well. But eventually the truth grew too big to conceal. When my parents found out, they called it a disgrace, an embarrassment to the family name. They gave me an ultimatum: give the baby up for adoption, or get out. I chose Grace, without hesitation, without regret. Even now, huddled in the freezing cold with my baby's fragile body against mine, I didn't regret it, but I was terrified. I had nowhere to go. My best friend Sophie Brennan loved me, but her parents had made it clear. No room for scandal in their home. I was 17, alone with a newborn, who depended on me for everything. When the battered blue truck pulled up, part of me screamed not to trust it, not to trust anyone. But Grace whimpered against my chest, her tiny body trembling. And something in the old woman's voice, sharp but not unkind, cut through the fear. "I don't bite, girl," she called again. "But that storm will." My heart pounded so loudly I could hardly hear myself think. But my legs moved before my brain could catch up. I stumbled toward the truck. The woman leaned across the seat and opened the door. Heat spilled out like a miracle, washing over me and Grace in a blessed wave. I climbed in my hands, shaking too much to close the door behind me. The woman reached over and pulled it shut with a grunt. Up close, she was even stranger. Wild silver hair poked out from under a knitted cap. Her coat was patched and faded. The dashboard of the truck was cluttered with little carved animals, crystal pendants, and a taxidermy owl perched on the back seat. She didn't seem dangerous, just different. "Name's Margaret Whitlock," she said, shifting the truck into gear. "You got a place to go, sweetheart?" I shook my head, tears blurring the chaotic cabin of the truck. Margaret studied me for a long moment. Her eyes were pale blue, almost silver sharp, and assessing. "No home, huh?" She muttered more to herself than to me. "Well, I got a cabin about 20 miles outside town. It's not much, but it's warm." Every warning I'd ever been given about strangers screamed in my head. But then Grace whimpered again, a pitiful, broken sound that sliced through every ounce of hesitation. I had no choice. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice cracking. Margaret gave a grunt of acknowledgement. "Don't thank me yet," she said, steering the truck into the white void ahead. "You haven't seen where I live." I huddled in the corner of the seat, clutching Grace as we bumped and slid along snow-covered roads. Each mile farther from town, farther from everything familiar, tightened the knot of fear in my chest. But when I looked down at Grace, at her tiny red cheeks, her little fists curled up against me, I knew I would do anything, go anywhere, risk everything for her. The drive felt endless, The storm swallowed everything beyond the truck's dim headlights. The only sounds were the rattling of the old vehicle and Margaret's occasional muttering under her breath. When we finally turned onto a narrow path barely visible beneath the snow, my heart clenched tighter. Trees loomed on either side like silent sentinels. I tightened my grip on Grace, whispering soothing nonsense into her tiny ear. The cabin appeared suddenly between the trees, a small A-frame structure with a steep roof and a thin trail of smoke curling from a stone chimney. It looked modest, lonely, but warm. Home sweet home. Margaret announced, pulling the truck up close. She killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. Getting from the truck to the cabin was its own kind of battle. The snow was knee-deep. Margaret went first, forging a path with surprising strength for someone her age. I stumbled after her, clutching Grace, every step a prayer. Inside the cabin was something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Every surface, every shelf, every inch of wall space was covered with strange objects, stacks of books in languages I couldn't recognize, collections of rocks and shells, dried plants hanging from the ceiling, antique dolls with glass eyes that seemed to watch us, crystals swaying from the rafters, catching the firelight, and everywhere tiny animal carvings, delicate and detailed. It was overwhelming, chaotic, yet somehow there was an odd sense of order to it, a logic that wasn't immediately obvious but felt deliberate. Margaret shrugged off her parka and hung it on a hook by the door. She waved toward an armchair near the wood stove, the heart of the room glowing with blessed heat. "Sit," she ordered. "You're shaking like a leaf." I obeyed, sinking into the chair and unwrapping Grace just enough to check her face. Red cheeks, runny nose. Still breathing, still alive. Without a word, Margaret disappeared into a small adjoining room. She returned minutes later with a warm bottle in one hand and a wooden drawer lined with blankets in the other. "Here," she said, handing me the bottle. "Feed her, then settle her in this baby's sleep better with solid sides around them." I stared at her. How did she know? How did she move with such ease around a crying newborn? Margaret caught my look and raised an eyebrow. "I've known plenty of beginnings and endings, child," she said quietly. Then she busied herself stoking the fire higher. After Grace drank half the bottle and finally relaxed into sleep, I placed her gently in the makeshift crib. Margaret nodded approvingly, like a stern teacher grading a project. "There, Mar," she said. "She'll be fine now." Only then did I realize how exhausted I was. Every muscle in my body ached. My head throbbed, my heart felt bruised. Margaret must have seen it. She pointed to a door at the back of the cabin. "Bathroom's through there. Hot water if you're quick. Generators hanging on by a thread in this storm." The thought of a shower, real blessed hot water, was too much to resist. "You'll watch her?" I asked, my voice small. Margaret nodded once, sharp and sure. "I haven't forgotten how to hold a baby, huh?" she said, settling into the armchair beside Grace's drawer crib. Her hands were weathered but steady. In that moment I believed her, not just because I wanted to, because something about her felt solid, safe. Like a lighthouse in the middle of a blizzard, I handed Grace over, heart pounding. Then I disappeared into the bathroom and let the hot water wash away. Not just the dirt, but the fear that had been clinging to me like a second skin. When I returned wrapped in borrowed clothes that smelled faintly of tobacco and pine, I found Margaret softly singing to Grace, an old folk song I didn't recognize, her voice rough but steady. On the small table nearby, a bowl of soup and a thick slice of bread waited for me, simple, hearty, warm. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't surviving, I was living. The blizzard didn't let up, not the next day, not the day after that. For 3 endless days, the cabin became our entire world. Margaret and I fell into an uneasy rhythm. She tended the fire, muttered to herself as she organized piles of rocks and papers. I cared for Grace, who seemed to grow stronger in the warmth of the small home. The days blurred together, feedings, wood chopping, long silences filled only by the crackle of the stove and the howling wind outside. At night, after Grace finally slept, I would sit by the fire. Margaret would pull out one of her battered journals, scribbling observations with the intensity of a woman trying to catch every fleeting moment I watched her, sometimes wondering, who was she before all this isolation, before the forest swallowed her life whole? It was on the third night that I noticed it again. That door, the one painted a faded blue, the one with the handwritten sign that said, "Phoebe's room, keep out." The only place in the cabin I hadn't dared to enter, the only place Margaret never even glanced towards. Something about that door tugged at me, a question without an answer. A wound still bleeding hidden behind peeling paint and old memories. Late one evening after Grace had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, Margaret caught me looking. Her voice came sharp through the dim light. "Nothing behind that door concerns you," she said. Without lifting her eyes from her journal, I looked away quickly, shame burning my cheeks. I wasn't going to— "Good," she interrupted, "because some rooms are meant to stay closed." Her tone left no room for argument. I nodded, swallowing the words I wanted to say. That night, lying awake in the borrowed bed near the fire, I stared at the blue door across the room. The cabin creaked and groaned around me, the storm outside battering against the old walls. I thought about choices, the ones that had brought me here, the ones I was too scared to make now. I thought about how Margaret had opened her home to a stranger and her baby without hesitation, and how even with that kindness, she still kept part of herself locked away. Maybe we were the same, I thought. Two broken things clinging to survival, guarding our wounds so tightly we forgot what it felt like to heal. The next morning, everything changed. Margaret handed me a broom without ceremony. "This isn't a hotel," she said. "If you're staying here, you pull your weight." I wasn't offended. Grateful, even grateful to feel useful, needed. While Grace napped, Margaret taught me how to tend the fire properly. Not just throwing logs on it, but choosing the right wood, pine for quick bursts of heat, birch for slow, steady warmth. "You don't just survive winter," she said. "Adjusting the logs with practiced hands, you make it obey you." Later, she showed me her collections. Every strange object had a purpose. The rocks were geological samples. The dried plants, medicinal herbs she had gathered herself. The carved animals, models for a study on local wildlife migration. Margaret Whitlock, it turned out, wasn't just some eccentric old woman. She had been a scientist once, a professor at the university in Fairbanks, someone who had dedicated her life to understanding the Arctic, until something involving that blue door had broken her. We didn't speak of it, but it hovered between us, unseen. Unsaid, heavy as the storm clouds pressing against the roof. I didn't know it then, but we had already passed the point of no return. I wasn't just a stranded girl anymore. And Margaret wasn't just a strange old woman. We were becoming something else, something fragile, something real, a family. Neither of us dared to say it out loud, but in the way she tucked an extra blanket around Grace at night, in the way I stirred soup for two, without asking, in the way we both stopped feeling quite so alone. It was already happening, without permission, without a plan, like the first stubborn bud of green pushing through frozen ground. Something new, something hopeful, growing quietly between two broken souls. It happened on the fifth night. The wind had finally died down. Outside, the world was buried under drifts so high they swallowed the trees halfway up their trunks. Grace was asleep. Margaret sat by the stove, whittling a piece of wood into the rough shape of a bird. And I couldn't stop staring at that blue door. The key found me by accident. I had been searching for extra blankets in a trunk near Margaret's bed. Buried under layers of quilts, my fingers brushed against something small and cold. A brass key, tied with a faded blue ribbon. I held it in my palm. Heart pounding against my ribs, I should have left it there. I should have respected the boundaries that Margaret had drawn so clearly. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially for a girl who had already lost everything. I moved quietly across the cabin. The key slid into the lock without resistance, as if the door had been waiting for this moment all along. The door swung open with a soft creak. The room inside was frozen in time. A nursery walls painted a soft yellow hand-painted murals of foxes and bears, chasing each other through green forests. A wooden crib stood at the center, draped with a patchwork quilt. Shelves lined with children's books, stuffed animals sitting neatly in a rocking chair, waiting for a child who would never return. It was perfect, and it was devastating. On a small dresser, framed photographs caught the weak light. One in particular drew me in a younger Margaret cradling a newborn, wrapped in a knitted blanket. Her face radiated a joy, so fierce it almost hurt to look at Phoebe. The name whispered in my mind like a prayer, Phoebe Whitlock. The daughter Margaret had built this world for. The daughter she had lost. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned slowly, my heart climbing into my throat. Margaret stood in the doorway. Her face was carved from stone. No anger, no surprise. Just a bone-deep sorrow that stole the breath from the room. "I told you to stay out," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I didn't mean to. I found the key by accident and—" She raised a hand, silencing me. Her eyes drifted across the room, lingering on the crib, the murals, the tiny socks folded neatly in a basket. "You might as well hear it," she said. Stepping into the room, her fingers trailed lightly over the crib's worn edge. "I was 34 when Phoebe was born. I thought I could do it all. Be a single mother, be a professor, be enough." Her voice cracked on the last word. She paused, steadying herself before continuing. "We spent our days here, mostly weekends. Holidays, she loved the snow, she loved the stars, she loved everything." Margaret's hand tightened on the crib railing. "The winter she turned 3, we came up here for Christmas, a storm hit. Not unlike this one, and she got sick. Started with a cough. Turned into a fever. I tried everything. Medicines, herbs, but the roads were blocked. The phone lines down. By the time I managed to get her into the truck and halfway to town," she stopped, closed her eyes, breathed once shakily. "She died in my arms, 5 miles from help, 2 hours too late." The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted to say something. Anything, but no words seemed right. "I left this room exactly as it was," she said, brushing a stuffed bear with trembling fingers, as if keeping it intact could somehow keep her close. I stepped closer, heart aching. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "It's not your fault." Margaret smiled, but it was a broken thing. A mother's heart doesn't listen to reason. She sank into the rocking chair and closed her eyes for a long moment. "I wasn't planning to stop that night," she said finally. "When I saw you standing there in the snow, it was like seeing a ghost, or maybe a second chance." She opened her eyes and looked at me, really looked. "You saved me too," she said. "I didn't realize how empty it had all become until you two filled it up again." The weight between us shifted, softened. Not erased, but shared. Grace stirred in her sleep from the main room. Margaret smiled this time, something gentler, more real. "Go check on her," she said softly. "I'll be along," I nodded, stepping carefully from the room, leaving the door open behind me. The past was part of this house, part of Margaret, part of us now. There was no shutting it away anymore, no pretending it had never happened, only carrying it forward together. The storm broke 2 days later. The world outside transformed from an endless whiteout into a glittering landscape of buried trees and frozen silence. Margaret checked the weather radio that morning and gave a small grunt. "Ben should be able to make it through today," she said. "Bring supplies, news." I nodded, my stomach tightening. I hadn't let myself think much about the world beyond the cabin. Now it was coming back, with all its unfinished business. Ben Ashford arrived just before noon, pulling up on a snow machine with a sled packed full of goods. He was a sturdy man in his 50s, with laugh lines around his eyes, and a careful way of moving like he respected the land too much to rush through it. "So you're the girl," he said, kindly shaking my hand. "And this little one must be Grace." His gaze softened as he looked at her bundled in my arms. Inside the cabin, over steaming mugs of coffee, Ben shared the news. My parents had been asking around Daniel Mercer too. Word had spread that I was still in Alaska. Still alive. Still with the baby. I should have expected it. But hearing it out loud made my chest ache. The world hadn't forgotten me. It was coming for me, and I would have to face it. Ben hesitated before adding, "There's talk that Daniel might come looking. He's been asking about you, about Grace." Margaret's face darkened. "He's not taking that baby," she said firmly, her voice like steel cooled in ice. "Not unless you want him to." I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me still clung to the fantasy that he might have changed, that he might care now, but another sharper part of me remembered how easily he had disappeared when I needed him most. We didn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, a sleek black car pulled into the clearing. Daniel Mercer stepped out, his hair neatly combed, a puffer jacket, too clean for this kind of winter. He looked older, but not wiser, Hailey. He called out, spotting me on the porch with Grace. His voice was almost pleading. I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't run to him. Margaret stood just inside the door, silent, a mountain of quiet presence at my back. Daniel crunched across the snow toward me, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he said. Stopping a few feet away, his eyes flicked to Grace. "And for her." I shifted Grace on my hip protectively. "Funny. You weren't so interested when I first told you about her." He flinched. "I know I was scared I was stupid, but I want to fix it now." He launched into a hurried explanation. His parents would help. He had an apartment near his college. We could live there, he would work part-time, finish his degree, support us. All the while he kept saying, "I will," and "I can," and "my parents." Not once did he ask what Grace needed. Not once did he ask what I wanted. Finally, he reached out, hesitant. "Can I hold her?" Grace nestled against me. Stirred uneasily at his voice, I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to protect her. But I also knew Grace deserved to see for herself. I handed her over carefully. Daniel's hands were awkward, unsure. He cradled her stiffly like someone holding a glass ornament they were terrified of dropping. Grace peered up at him wide-eyed, then turned her head seeking me. Daniel smiled weakly. "She's beautiful. She has my eyes." "No," Margaret said quietly from the doorway. "She has her own," Daniel's smile faltered. After a few minutes, Grace began to fuss. Daniel panicked, shifting her clumsily. I stepped forward, taking her back into my arms. Her body relaxed against mine instantly. "Safe home." Daniel shoved his hands in his pockets. "I just want to do right by her." He mumbled. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized the truth. Daniel wanted to ease his guilt, to check a box labeled responsibility. But he wasn't ready to be a father. Not really, not yet. Maybe not ever. "I appreciate that," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But Grace already has what she needs." Daniel stared at me, confused, wounded. But he didn't argue. He just nodded stiffly, turned, and trudged back to his car. Driving away into the glittering, silent woods, inside the cabin I held Grace close and let out a long, shuddering breath. Margaret said nothing. She didn't have to. Her steady presence said it all. I had made my choice. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of love. Real love. The kind that stays, the kind that fights, the kind that doesn't need to be earned. Grace cooed softly against my shoulder, her tiny hand clutching a strand of my hair. And I knew deep in my bones, we were going to be okay. We already were. Spring came late to Alaska. The snow melted slowly, reluctant to release the land from its icy grip. But when it did, it happened almost overnight. Birdsong filled the mornings. Green shoots pushed stubbornly through the thawing ground. Life, it seemed, refused to be silenced. So did we. Margaret stood with me on the porch one morning, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. Grace sat on my hip, babbling happily at the world waking up around us. "You're thinking about leaving," Margaret said quietly. Not a question, a statement. She knew I nodded. I need to finish school, get a real job, build a future for her. Margaret sipped her coffee, her eyes scanning the endless stretch of forest before us. "I have a house in Fairbanks," she said, casually. "Been renting it out for years. Needs a little work, but it's close to the university. You could live there, if you want." I turned to her, stunned. "You're serious?" She shrugged, but there was a softness at the corners of her mouth. "I'm too old to raise another baby full-time, but I'm not too old to help you build something better." Something inside me cracked open. A warmth I hadn't let myself feel in months flooded in. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tightening. "Thank you for everything." Margaret reached out, rough fingers brushing Grace's soft hair. "Family isn't always about blood," she said. "Sometimes it's about who shows up when no one else does." I looked out over the forest, the mountains, the melting snow. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. I felt rooted, ready. We weren't what anyone would call a traditional family, but we were ours, and that was enough. Maybe family isn't something you're born into. Maybe it's something you choose, something you fight for, something you build one brave decision at a time. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And sometimes the ones who start out as strangers become the family we never knew we needed. Hailey chose her daughter over her reputation. Margaret chose healing over isolation. Together, they built something stronger than blood ties. They built a home because real family is not about shared DNA. It's about showing up, it's about fighting for each other when the storms come. It's about love, raw, messy, imperfect, and choosing it again and again. What about you? Have you ever found family in an unexpected place? If you were standing where Hailey stood that night, would you have taken the risk? Would you have trusted a stranger? Or frozen in fear? I would love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and if this story touched you. Type, "I believe in second chances," in the comments. And if you never want to miss another powerful true story like this, make sure to subscribe to EN Reddit Story. A new chapter of courage, heartbreak, and redemption every single day.